All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Know Your Builder or KYB. It's a series that we're doing as the L2B governance team where we're interviewing different projects from our space. These days, we're talking with projects from Optimism, and more specifically, today we have Yitong from Agora, which is the governance platform for Optimism governance. Yitong, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Nice to have you. Christoph as well, here from L2B team, the governance lead. Christoph, nice of you to be here as well.
Yeah, hey, hello.
All right, and yeah, let's start, Yitong, with a quick intro about you and a little bit about Agora. So, folks, we are gonna assume that people don't know what Agora is. Probably that's not the case, but let's take it from the very beginning and assume that people do not know what Agora is. So, why don't you do a quick intro?
Sure thing. Man, it's been 2 years, hasn't it? So Agora is a governance company. We build end-to-end tooling for communities to get organized, make decisions, and then make some of the most critical upgrades or transactions of their community by either directly managing protocol upgrades or large treasury transfers. We also work on a bunch of stuff that's governance adjacent. So retro funding is a big part of what we work as well on as well. I would actually classify that as more just straight up governance than governance adjacent, maybe. But yeah, those are the two general cover areas that we cover. And As a company, we're around 13 people. And it's The co-founders are myself, my co-founder Charlie, and then our CTO Kent. So that's the quick high level. I myself got into crypto way back in 2017 when I first bought ETH. I was super excited about ETH as sort of a new, I guess, like software for coordinating people, designing incentives, and was just like super psyched to build in ETH. But then there was absolutely nothing to build in ETH in 2017, to be honest. I went to Coinbase, worked there for 4 years, and then took a look again in 2022, and I was like, oh, okay, now there's a lot of stuff to build. So that's when we started Agora.
And what price point did you buy the ETH in 2017? Was it like 4,000 ETH or was it like $90 ETH?
I bought maybe at like $100, $200, I want to say. Um, and then like obviously also bought the top to be clear. So multiple entry points. So I saw the rush of the bull and then the sadness of the bear. And then again.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember buying $90 ETH and these were the times. But having said that, I remember meeting Charlie in Denver 2 years ago. And that's how I learned about you guys for what you're doing. Obviously, I knew Optimism at that point, but can you give us some background on how did it start? Like how did you create Agora? Like where this idea of creating governance tooling came to you at all?
Yeah, we've been wanting to. So in 2022, like Charlie and I and Kent were all very. By the way, I don't think you guys have met Kent, but Kent's also a huge part of the story. He goes to conferences less because he has young kids. And frankly, our whole team reports to Kent. So he's like our third co-founder. But the whole idea was sort of that like we really wanted to work in this space because it was at the intersection of a lot of things we were interested in. Like we were interested in governance, coordination, finance, crypto. Um, and this is sort of a shared interest point among all three of us. And it was kind of hard to find something to a wedge to start building in the space. As you guys know yourselves, it's sort of like a small space, and it's a little tough to build in, right? It's not like DeFi where it's like a large, like if you can make prices go up, then people will come. It's a little bit of a nuance to take. So for us, it was like a lot of trying stuff early on in 2022 of like, hey, let's just see where is the intersection of people willing to experiment with governance and also who have like serious like governance dreams or and goals, right? So to us, a really good partner to work with that we could do problem discovery with and sort of like like start informing our thesis with is somebody who meet those criteria. And actually, I don't know if you remember, Christoph, but it was announced that first was the pilot community that funded Agora, and they were like, "Oh, okay, we're super interested in like governance stuff." And so like, hey, like, and this is a shout out to Noun 40, who was the first whoever was like, "Yo, you guys, you know what you guys should do? You guys should make delegates more visible." Because right now it's really hard to see who's a delegate. And delegates actually make a ton of decisions, and they have like, it's not just the token holders who make decisions, it's really the delegates. And nowhere can I see who's delegating. In fact, people don't even know that you can delegate your tokens. And I was like, oh, that seems like a real problem that like we would love to like work on. And so we did that for nouns. And then nouns was like, oh, thank God, like now we can finally see the delegates. And then everybody else around nouns, who like were like much bigger protocols. They were like, wait a minute, we have delegates too, and we can't see our delegates. Only Compound at that time had a dashboard to show their delegates, and we're like, oh shit, okay, everybody does very different things, but they all have the same problems. Interesting. And that's kind of how we got started. We built more and more and more in nouns, and then eventually like got connected with the Optimism team, and they were also like, hey, like some of the stuff you're doing, we're pretty interested too, actually. Like this is some of them. We all run the same software under the hood, even though we're doing really different things. Do you guys want to come and build some stuff with us? We have some of the same problems too, and that's when we like jumped across to Optimism and started building there too, and then like to more communities after that. But that's sort of the quick history. Happy to dig into any of these parts.
Yeah. So I would like to amplify the shout out to Noun 40 because there's like the meeting where I met Charlie was actually the Nouns party, and I was talking to him
Yes.
actually. And talking that, yeah, I'm doing this governance thing a little bit, and he was instantly, yeah, like there's a guy you definitely need to meet. That's how I met Charlie. So yeah, once again, big shout out to
I have a
Nouns and Noun 40.
I have a noob question, but how would you
Please.
delegate your tokens pre-Agora? Like, would you do it on the contract, or like, let's say
So
you have a token.
everybody, yeah, it's a great question. There's sort of like, so this is not a thing that was very popular to have an interface for delegates until Agora came along. And I think on nouns, a lot of people were doing it directly on Etherscan. There was also this really hidden UI on the nouns website for it. I don't think that you could like Optimism had a custom implemented website that you could go to delegate. Um, I think on a lot of other places you literally just couldn't. You would have to find like the function. So it was like it was all over the place. It was not very standard. But now it really is, right? You can do it on Agora, you can do it on Tally, you can do it in a bunch of different places. It's sort of become this new pattern.
Okay, so let's dig into optimism. You mentioned how you got in touch with optimism, but like, what was the story? Like, how did you get involved? Like, what is so? What did would you say was special about optimism? Like, different? How did you? What were your first experiences with optimism?
Yeah. Well, I can tell the people story behind the scenes that's not really visible on the internet, which is that Piff, also by her real name, Kathy, Piff, the head of design at Optimism, was a friend of mine. We had met in San Francisco like in 2016, and then sort of like like not really like didn't really get to hang out very much until sort of like she joined crypto and Optimism. And then like I run a little community on the side called Vector DAO, and this is just a bunch of like designers in crypto. And when she joined, I invited her to the group chat, and we were like, "Hey, we should hang out more now that we're both working in crypto." And I was like, "Hey, one of the things that you might find interesting is nouns. So come check out this stuff that we're doing with nouns. Come be a delegate. You might find a lot of the creative projects that we're funding on nouns really fun." And she was like, "Oh, this is so cool. And by the way, let me introduce you to Bobby at the Optimism Foundation. And they've been thinking a lot about some of the same problems." And we just started talking, and they were like, "Oh, hey, like, yeah, we do think about a lot of the same problems. We want to go on chain. We want to deploy a governor. And then we have all these like issues around governance. Um, come, write a proposal, go to the forums and see what you can do. And that's what we did. Our first involvement in Optimism was a forum post where we asked for a little bit of a grant and then deployed Agora on Optimism. And then, like just gradually started doing more and more and more. I mean, to this day, now we do a lot. But yeah, I started with just one small grant request.
And maybe this is the time where we can ask you, and like, Yitong is not prepared for that, so I hope that it's not a big ask. If can you show us like how Agora works on Optimism? Like, what is it? So for people who are not necessarily familiar, like, so that they can see what are we talking about.
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to show you both Agora, which is the software that people use to engage with the token house. But I'm also going to show you retrofunding.optimism.io, which is the other part of the work that we do with Optimism that I think not a lot of people know about. I mean,
I knew
rightfully
about the
so.
portal,
It's
but I
mostly
didn't
only
know that it
citizens.
was. Yeah, I knew about the portal, but I didn't know that was you guys.
Yeah, yeah, that's us too. Oh, actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to share my screen, so I might need a
You can
permission.
now. Yeah, I just
Oh,
did.
perfect. Okay. Okay, that's gonna make it a little bit easier to see for everyone too. Perfect. Okay, thank you for flagging that. Let's start from the top. So this is Agora's token house portal. So many people who have voted on optimism on proposals, folks who have a delegate profile. This is the flow that you are probably familiar with. And this is our sort of main bread and butter product that we spend a lot of time on. And here, you can go directly interface with the governor of Optimism Governance, which is how the token house makes decisions. So some of the cool stuff that we do here is, the most basic thing is that you can come and vote a yes, no, or abstain on the proposal. So this, in this case, was a request for a rolling mission request. You can see how the vote is progressing, who's voting for what. And I think one thing that we brought over from Nouns that I think was not previously very popular is sort of this vote with reason sidebar. I'm quite proud of this. This, I think, sort of encourages people to be a little bit more thoughtful in their voting reasons on chain. Whereas before, a lot of people used to post this stuff on discourse, and it was a little harder to see. Now we've sort of grown a little bit of a space for people to express themselves as they vote. We recently also introduced this feature called hasn't voted. So that helps people see, by order of largest. Oh, interesting. There's a little bug here. Okay.
Yeah,
I was like, you guys have voted and not voted. Okay. Good live bug discovery. Yeah. So this
Yeah,
little new
that's how
feature.
live presentations always go. But yeah, that's the proof that we are doing this actually live.
That's right. That's right. Um, yeah, so we can show people who voted, haven't voted. You can sort of see the timeline for the proposal by hovering over this chart. What's really cool and unique about Optimism, though, is we have the ability to conduct on-chain multiple choice votes, which usually is only available via snapshot. And this felt silly because it feels correct that communities should be asking multiple choice questions in proposals. This seems like nobody would ever say no. It just takes a little bit of work to get this to happen. And I feel like we must have done like 30 or 40 of these already on Optimism, and they've been incredibly helpful in asking more sophisticated questions with a more nuanced answer set than just a simple yes, no. And this is all sort of like new work that we did in collaboration with Optimism. Justine called us one day and she was like, "Hey, can I do multiple choice votes?" And we're like, "No, but you should." And so we built it. So a lot of stuff like this happens in Optimism.
Sorry, to
Which
give some background to this, like those multiple choice votes are really super important in some cases. For example, elections require multiple choice votes. Also, there are a lot of votes that are votes on the budget, where we are voting on multiple projects that we want to fund, and there are like certain interesting mechanisms that you have implemented that allow us to actually vote on a budget and only like and we complete the budget, but we don't have to like fit the whole budget in our choice. It's actually, when I'm
Wow.
thinking about it right now, it's pretty complicated.
It was very complicated. I'm glad you noticed. I wasn't gonna get into the weeds of it, but yes, there's actually here. Let me show you a secret. I mean, this is not really a secret. It's just the I mean, this might also make some people mad because I know it's an ongoing issue that only the manager is allowed to create proposals. Let me see if I can show you this
We're getting
flow
into
real quick.
alpha now.
But I wanted to show you like behind the scenes how it works. I mean, this is sort of a builder podcast, right? So I want to show you a little bit of behind the scenes how the manager goes and creates a multiple choice votes, which is actually quite nuanced. So here I'm just like logging in as I'm spoofing the Optimism manager address. Oh wait, this is the wrong address. All right. Well, if this goes too long, you guys feel free to cut this part. But I want to try to make sure that I can show you guys this thing. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So this is the create draft flow that today is only visible to the Optimism manager. And then the cool thing that I want to show you is the approval vote here. So the approval vote, you're totally right to identify, is pretty complex. So we have threshold-based votes and top choices votes. So this is sort of like a pretty nuanced mechanic and also a budget. So if we want to say, hey, like a bunch of people have like a request for grants, and then we're saying that like it seems all this stuff seems pretty interesting, but we don't really want to spend more than like say like $100,000 or 100,000 tokens on these grants. So we can say fund options until we run out of budget, which I think puts a cap on the spending, which I think could be really interesting. If you're like, well, even though there might be more projects who apply for grants that we want to fund this season, but we have a hard budget this season of 100K, so we can simply go here and say 100K, and then we can also say, okay, well, we're going to only fund 3 of the top choices, and if there's like 4 of the 3 choices, if they're requesting a sum of more than 100K, then we will fund until the 100K runs out. So the last project might not get funded if the first project has like a big project request. So it's a little bit complex, but it gives a lot of expressivity and nuance for us to sort of make decisions as a community that sort of hopefully leads to a little bit less chaos and a little bit better decision making towards the end. You can also do threshold-based voting. I think this is not as popular, but this version means that like any choice that meets a certain threshold of votes gets funded, and we don't care about how many options there are to be funded. And we're gonna just approve all of these as long as they are within our budget. So also really cool mechanic there.
Yeah, we were using this as well because there were votes in Optimus. I remember that we simply wanted to make sure that there is enough support for the given options. So that's where threshold is being used.
Oh, I don't know that. Okay, great. Yeah, seems like we're using threshold a bunch too. I'm happy to hear it.
Wasn't that
I'm
mission?
pretty sure. Like I think we had something like that, especially in the past.
Yeah, yeah. I wish that we would show if it was a threshold based approval vote on this here. So maybe eventually we add threshold based or top choices.
Discovering feature requests as we go.
Yeah, I never talk to you guys without discovering new feature requests. So it's great.
Yeah, like speaking about feature requests, I want to share that you actually, there is a thing that you implemented based on like mine feedback, or at least mine among others,
Yeah.
as there was this issue that when we were selecting multiple choices, it went straight in like it was complicated. There is because the whole flow between selecting choices and then signing transactions and having the choice approved on chain was a bit complicated. And there were cases where people simply got lost in that, including me, like me, guilty as charged. So what I wanted, what I asked Yitong after doing this mistake is, hey, can we have a summary of the vote after I do all my selections and fill all the rationale? And actually, Agora implemented it quite smoothly and quite quickly after the feedback. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, of course. No, that's just how we work, right? Like it's really important to us that like when people tell us something that's not working, that we go and fix it. That's how the product gets better. And I just found a threshold-based vote. So there we go. You're totally right. This one is threshold-based and it was pretty recent.
Yeah, the mystery.
Speaking of feature requests, something that we've been recently discussing during the Anti-Capture Commission in Optimism. Uh, when will we be able to change the vote after we cast it? Do you have it on
Um,
your backlog somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, we do have it on our backlog. It's sort of like I think I've come to that meeting and sort of had this quick discussion with you guys. But that is not a simple feature to implement on the contract level. If it became very important that we have that, the way that we would do it is it would be likely some sort of off-chain version where you cast vote with signature. And then we don't submit your signature until you at the very last minute. And we have a relayer that submits your signature, and then you can come back before it's submitted and then change your vote so that before it hits the chain, that you can still sign it. But once it hits the chain, it is actually quite hard to change it. It would actually require some pretty major surgery on the logic of the governor. But it's in the
I don't.
cards, but it's like the cost is great. And not
Yeah,
easy. So if you folks feel strongly about it, we'll go and do it, but it will take a lot of care and a lot of time to do
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
right.
So I don't like the relayer architecture, but like the conclusion yesterday was, and like my argument was that, yeah, like this is something that is nice to have, but it's not a quick fix. So let's not
Yeah.
push for that
I
until we
don't,
know that we really need it.
yeah, exactly. So if I presented the choice, obviously it's not a strict trade-off, but it can be, right? Like in terms of timing, which is that like, hey, like should we spend more of our resourcing making sure that we have a really good like permissionless proposal submission system so that like we have, Ben already described on the forums like the idea of how he wants to do permissionless proposal submission. There's sort of different thresholds for different kinds of proposals. So we can go implement that system, which I think would make delegates and the foundation both really happy so that folk community can more and more engaged. Or we can spend the same time and go make proposal votes. You can make the fact that you can change votes happen, and both are difficult. But I think most people would want to see us work on the former so that more people can submit proposals.
Absolutely, fully agree.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, and I'm not sure how many other features you want to showcase in terms of the like token house platform, but
Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to venture into the RPGF one as well.
Of course. So retro funding has been this like really massive multi-party project, and I want to make sure that like I accurately represent the fact that like we worked on the retro funding sign up this sort of like like home portal, if you will, for retro funding. And this has been sort of like one of the big projects that we've been working on over the last year. Of like, okay, how do we stand up a first-party retro funding experience for Optimism? That is creates a home for this website. Oh, sorry. And you'll see that we worked on this because I can disable the dev toolbar. But yeah, so this is sort of like we went from spreadsheets to sort of a real home for retro funding, which as the program grows, really requires the software support because it's more and more difficult to manage. More rounds, more complexity.
And let me add some background because some of the people listening to this might not know the details. How is it different? So the biggest difference of what we are talking about right now is that there are those two houses in Optimism. There is this like this token house that is like traditional token voting mechanism that is pretty common across the different DAOs, across the different governance mechanisms in crypto. And then there is this citizen house, which is completely different because it's like one person, one vote, and it's only like quite small at this point set of people who are allowed to vote, who have those badges, who are badge holders and are citizens and are able to vote on projects. And RPGF is a citizens house fund. Like it's their mandate to allocate those funds. So here it's not the token voting, but like badge holder citizen voting. It's one person, one vote kind of mechanism with also some additional extras that we are experimenting with along the line. So it's a totally different mechanism, like completely different from what we've been discussing just a minute ago.
That's right. Thank you for the context. The only thing that I'll add is that the program is now called retro funding. I know that we still slip often and call it RPGF. I do too. But in the interest of moving to the new name, this is now the retro funding program. And yeah, I have nothing to add. That was really great. And that maybe the thing that really drove the need for software is that like is round three. Um, and round three was this massive round. I don't know if you guys remember. So round one and round two were really small rounds. They were run with very few badge holders, and much fewer projects. And then round three, the scope dramatically expanded. And that's when we first started building software for retro funding. I remember people having ballots of like hundreds of projects where they're trying to allocate, I think, 30 million OP. Is that
Absolutely. I
right?
can I can add to that because I am a badge holder. I am a citizen, and in this run three, but run two was also massive. Like we didn't have any tools, so we were voting in Excel files, and
That's right.
going back and forth between
Yeah, I
Excel
think round
and
two is when
web
people
pages.
realized that we needed tooling,
Yeah,
and then round
like
three was the first time we had it.
run three, I think it took me easily 40 to I don't know, maybe 60 hours just
Yeah,
creating my list.
yeah, it was crazy. And the round three model was like partially supported by software, right? A lot of stuff was sort of still done behind the scenes, manually. And then like after round three, what Optimism realized is that, oh no, we can't keep doing like increasingly linearly bigger rounds. We have to break these apart. And if we're gonna break these apart, we're gonna have to do more frequent rounds with different mechanics. And that really increased the need for software. And so that's when we fully committed to building if you remember, the round three software lived on the Agora website as just a random tab. Um, but now, like now that there's sort of this full-throated commitment to building out retrofunding as a software program, it migrated towards this like dedicated retrofunding website.
Yeah, and something that I can add from the other side is that it's important to know that like retro funding is still an experiment. It's something that we are still working on and figuring out like how it should go. We discuss a lot. Like how is it working and how should we experiment more on it? So it's a living mechanism. It's not something that we kind of have some kind of a specification that now Agora just needs to implement. It's something that is constantly evolving, and I'm pretty sure that the things that we have right now, if we go back to this discussion a year after, like in a year from now, it will be totally different. I'm absolutely sure because we are constantly evolving this mechanism and learning down the road. I don't want to go deeper into that because I could speak about it for hours, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I feel
like
like we're both very
kudos
passionate
for
about
you.
sort of like
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just like before we move on from this, maybe I'll just also shout out all the teams that worked on this. So we don't like on Agora, we haven't worked on the voting experience for rounds four to six. There's many different teams who came and contributed to this project. Our consistent contribution was sort of this to this portal. But I mean, to support the experimentation that you mentioned, right? Every round had like a very slightly different voting mechanism. So there were many other teams who built voting interfaces specifically for that round to see what mechanism would work better, would be more accurate, would be more fair, would be more representative of the values of the collective, and also accurately assessing the contribution of each project. So huge ongoing experimentation evolution. And we're just incredibly lucky to be part of it.
yeah, and I've been working on software delivery for some time, and I can I can tell that having a project with such a constantly changing requirements and context. Like kudos to you to even be willing to work on it, because it is a challenge, and it's not easy to constantly adapt while running still a company.
Yeah, no, I mean the real shout out goes to just sort of like all the folks on the Optimism Foundation side who are willing to and to commit to a level of experimentation that I think many are not willing to. Right? There's a lot of people who like view governance not as an asset and not as sort of an important strategic question to figure out, but rather just a please let me copy paste what everybody seems to be doing. Like there's a real willingness and drive to learn at the Optimism Foundation and sort of iterate to make sure that we actually do governance right. And so that to us is the most inspiring thing. And this is why we feel incredibly lucky to work on this.
Speaking about like going back to optimism and and sticking to experimentation, let's talk about superchain, because we cannot talk about optimism without talking about superchain, and how optimism evolves from being just one chain to be this, collective of chains. How does it affect you? Like, how do you see this evolution of optimism? What are your thoughts on it? Are you working with other super chain teams? How do you see it?
Yeah, I love the super chain. I think it's such a cool thing. And it's like Kathy already knows this, but I think the biggest thing that the super chain need is a logo. Uh, that says I'm part of the super chain. You know, when you like, you buy, you guys are old enough to remember when you guys bought a PC tower and it says Intel inside. Like we need a super chain inside logo that everybody needs to put on their website. Um,
You get a super chain badge on L2Beat for that.
yeah, yeah.
So
I mean, maybe you guys just gotta talk, right? Because I feel like I mean I've seen that badge. It's a good badge. It literally looks a little bit like Intel inside. Um, But yeah, I think that's one thing that I would love to see a little bit more because people don't really understand the super chain. I think that's one of the big things about the super chain is that people are like, "What is this? What? How does it even?" Right? And I think this is sort of this incredibly interesting concept. And to us, what concretely it means is that um, optimism governance is ultimately going to be the key holder for the upgrade of all the chains in the super chain really, really scary for a lot of chains. And like one of the reasons that the Optimism Foundation is so set on making sure that governance is well functioning, legitimate, and also trustworthy is because they're gonna go around and ask super chain like chain operators, "Hey man, can we have your keys?" And people are gonna be like looking at governance, and they're gonna have to decide does the governance of Optimism seem legitimate? Can I trust my keys to Optimism's governance and the set of people who are behind it? If not, the super chain doesn't work, right? I feel like Optimism have 3 years in these like super chain operator contracts to make sure that they build incredibly legitimate governance that like after like makes people feel like it's super worth it to be part of the super chain and both sort of like the upgrade key, but also, in like a well-functioning retro funding system. It's really taking on, like Optimism is taking on the governance burden of the entirety of the chains that are, part of the super chain. Of course, many of these super chains also have their own governance, but really like a lot of the heavy lifting is done by Optimism. And so it puts a lot of burden on Optimism, making sure that it does it really well. And
Yeah.
that's to us is like really exciting.
Speaking of governance maturity, which I agree with you, by the way, like it's going to be an important factor for Superchain members. But speaking of governance, like maturity, I know that you guys with what you're building, you have interface with the governance of optimism to an extent, with the DAO and the token house. How has that experience been from the perspective of a project building on optimism? And especially like to the degree, like some projects might interface with the DAO, get a grant or whatever, but they're not building necessarily for the DAO. They're building their own thing on optimism. But you guys are building a governance platform that's being used by the DAO. So I'm curious as to what the experience has been in terms of whether you've gotten a grant, for example, or whether you've received like the feature requests you've received for delegates and how that back and forth goes. What has the experience been?
Yeah, I mean, I I I think the
Silence is
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, here I've said this to the optimism team, and I think they wouldn't be surprised to hear me here if they listen to this. But I think optimism is the king of dwarfs in this aspect. So in generally, I think working with DAOs, working with governance and foundations is quite difficult. It's really, really difficult. Um, and I think optimism has done an incredible job. But there is still so much to do. It's like the bar is really low right now for, like the user experience, if you will, of developers. And Optimism, I think, has done a reasonable job. But like it's still compared to like, working in Web 2, right? Working on a venture startup. It's still like totally different. And the reality is that like it's if you compare it to sort of like, hey, I want to build a SaaS company, like there's like a very well trodden like path for that. But if you want to say, I want to build an open source project, yeah, well, that's different, right? Like it depends on what you compare against. Building an open source project is really painful, and the coordination and sort of the amount of like forum drama, right? The amount of sort of like disagreement in public, like spicy Twitter threads it's pretty common, right? So if you view like at the lens of like, hey, how's it been? What's it like, working on an open source project with like billions at stake? You know what? We're doing pretty okay. Because the bar is so low. Because I mean, and this is not a diss to open source project, right? Because it's just hard and fundamentally different. But if you're like, hey, compared to like if you were a Shopify plugin on the Shopify like store, yeah, it's totally different. But it's like that's a we're not Shopify plugins, and none of us, and we're not working with Shopify store. And so I think it's just a matter of like perspective and what category you put things on. And I think we're probably closer in the category of open source software and open source communities than sort of like Shopify store and Shopify plugins. We're recording this on Black Friday in America. That's why I keep thinking about Shopify.
So I kind of expected that kind of an answer. I think it's still like politically correct answer. Uh, but let me ask this. So coming from us as these governors, as these delegates that complain all the time and that go on those forum, Telegram, Discord, and Twitter battles
Yeah.
constantly. Uh, and this is an honest question. Like, how can we help you do a better job? Like, if you could have a wish on this Black Friday that the governance and optimism specifically could do something to make your lives easier, what would you like to change, or what would you like us to do more? Like, how would you like what make your wish? Like, how can we
Uh,
make your lives easier?
I have two wishes. One for delegates in general and governance participant in general, and two for you specifically, L2Beat. My first one is just generally like I think there's a lot of discussions that as a tooling provider that we're not a part of. A lot of sort of like discussions among delegates. Frankly, I think should stay among delegates, right? So for example, when you say, oh, the ACC had a really good conversation about the reversibility of votes. Until it's cast, that kind of stuff is gold to me, right? It's the kind of like, oh, so this is what delegates talk about when we're not there, and then but later hearing that stuff is like super valuable, right? It's like that's like dream come true for me is like everybody after they have a private conversation then DMs me on Telegram. It's like, yo, like I don't know if you're gonna do anything about this, but it made my life a lot better if you blah blah blah. And just having the list of blah blah blah, you'd be surprised how not often I hear this. I hear it from you quite a bit, but it's not that often that people will just fire a DM at me and be like, "Do this, please," and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, if more people said that, I'd be very
Yeah,
happy."
maybe let's do the shout out because yeah, I have this thing that every time I see something on Agora that I would like to work differently, or something's not working, or even we discuss something that might be interesting, I just like I have this privilege that I can shoot a DM to Yitong on Telegram, and I use this opportunity a lot, and I can assure you that Yitong is super cooperative. And if for people who are listening to us, don't hesitate. Like find Yitong on wherever he will tell us soon where to find him, and shoot him a message. He's very responsive. He always reacts positively to feedback that I'm giving. Even sometimes, even when sometimes people who know me know that I sometimes can be harsh with my feedback. But like this relationship was perfect since it began. So I totally recommend like going to Yitong directly and providing feedback on what they're doing.
Yeah, thank you. And you don't have to be L2B to do it, right? Like I monitor all my DMs. I use an app called text.com. This is not a plug. Where like it helps me monitor all my DMs, from Twitter DMs to Telegram to wherever. So I see all my DMs. So unless you're trying to sell me followers on Twitter, I will read your DM, and I will reply. Um, so that's one. And the other one that I have as a request for you guys specifically is that I think that, I mean, you guys have done a phenomenal job sort of like establishing a standard for what it means to be a L2, a roll up, and sort of like have established a common measurement for roll up that is not economic. And I think that's sort of like so rare, right? Like the only it has been the case that DeFi Llama and CoinGecko were sort of the barometer by which we measured everything, for such a long time. And I was like, cool, like we could only measure price go up or TVL go up. And of course, like a big part of L2Beat is also like, like TVL go up. But that little pie, right? And the like, the work that you guys have put in on sort of like measuring non-economic activity on the chains has been incredible, right? It's like, are we stage one? Are we not stage one? Like, how's our little pie doing? And then like, like of the total value locked, what percent is canonical, what percent is native like token, and what percent is sort of external? That stuff is super interesting because it really monitor it's like a really good health monitor for like the entire roll-up ecosystem. Um, and I think something like this is needed for governance in general. I know there's like very sort of like overlappy with L2B, but not exactly the same. But I wish somebody would invent sort of like, hey, like what does it mean to have healthy governance? And it's definitely not how much treasury you have in how much value you have in your treasury. I have a lot of respect for the deep DAO people, but I think that like deep DAO measures fundamentally the wrong thing about governance. And it's sort of like because they're sort of like old, it's very popular for people to screenshot, deep down and be like, look at all this value locked in governance. I'm like, no, that's not the point, right? The point is that like, hey, like what kind of controls do we have in place? Like how many, what's the minimum number of people needed to push through any proposal, right? Is there on-chain execution? Is there a veto to on-chain execution? Who are the people who can veto the on-chain execution? Right? It's like how hard, like there's a bunch of stuff where it's like, yo, like if you're gonna engage in the project, if you're gonna buy a token, if you're gonna sort of like even invest in the project, you should know the control structures in place for that project. Like, is it legitimate? Or like if you buy a token, do you have a voice? If you have sort of like a project that integrates, with the system, can you get rugged? Or is it the case that like, hey, actually, like this is a pretty darn governed thing, a well-governed thing. It's a little bit like, like people when they build software and they look at the dependency packages in their software, like they'll go and look at like, is this an actively maintained package? Is this thing total shit show? Right? Like if you're gonna like a crypto is sort of money Lego, right? And everybody has tons and tons of like dependencies, integrations with projects, and they should be able to go somewhere and be like, yo, like, is this project like well maintained, well governed? And am I gonna find out one day that they blew up because like, the team ran away with the funds, or it was just really poorly managed and they were attacked? Like something like that should exist. And like ideally, you can almost have a badge of like this is reasonably governed and here because like, like they have all these criteria. So I don't know. Somebody should build this. I don't think it should be us. I should be somebody who sort of like is a little bit of a third party, credible, like sort of like watchdog organization. Anyway, you guys have a lot of scope already with L2s. So, but like, I'm putting this
Yeah,
out there in the world.
I can tell you that like this is something that I'm thinking about for like at least a year about. However, the thing with this is that it's super complex and complicated.
It's very complicated.
I like to say that the thing that you are doing, the voting mechanism, and like this will be very ungrateful what I will say right now, but the voting itself, I always say that the voting itself is just an optional step, like optional step in the governance process. Like
Yes.
if everything before was done properly, and if we've put enough work before the vote, then the vote is just a ratification of what we decided before. And equally important is what happens after the vote happens. One thing is to make a decision, and another thing is to actually execute on this decision and make sure that it was executed properly. And when people ask me where is governance, like where do you see the governance? One thing is voting platforms like Agora or like other platforms out there, Tally, Aragon, others. However, where the real governance is happening is all over the place. It's discourse, it's Discord, it's Telegram groups, it's
Yep.
meetups, and let me shill here our office hours. We at Autobeat, we are holding those office hours weekly for all the ecosystems in which we are present. So, for example, for Optimism, it's always on Thursday. Always on Tuesday, 4 p.m. UTC. Like Thursday is Arbitrum, Friday, all the other ecosystems. And this is like the crucial part of the governance where people can reach out to us and like talk to us, because governance is all about coordination and decision making, and executing on those decisions.
Yeah.
So like I totally agree with you. Unfortunately, I cannot promise we'll have a
It's very
down
hard. I know. I know. It's not just like, you snap your fingers and you can do this, because
Yeah,
there's a lot of things that
and
are hard to measure.
yeah, exactly. So even for things that are kind of measurable, the things that we are presenting at Autobeat as those pizza security pizzas, like it took us more than half a year to simply create an underlying backend mechanisms to be able to assess all those projects, to gather the data that allows us to assess those projects, because we want to know that if we are providing some assessment on the project, we know that it is based on actual on-chain data. Like it took us tremendous amount of time to do this, and it's probably much more challenging to do this for governance because, as I said, governance is spread all over the place. It's
Yep.
easy to,
No.
as you mentioned,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
easy to
And you guys are a
show
big
that,
team, right? It's like
yeah, like
I don't
we
think
are,
people I don't think people realize how hard it is to do L2 beat. So I have full awareness of like, this is why nobody has built this, because it's really freaking hard.
yeah. So every time
Yeah.
somebody says to me like, hey, we'll build X, like L2Bit for X, L2Bit for wallets, L2Bit for DeFi, we are always like, yes, we are keeping fingers crossed. You can use all the tooling that we made because it's all free software or open source. Like you can use it. We will even help you use it. But it's a tough job, and it's really not
Yeah.
an easy thing to do. Anyway, let's
And it's
go
like,
back to
yeah.
yeah,
And
My
yeah,
favorite,
I was gonna say, and it's not set and forget either, because you have to constantly
yeah,
update things, right?
yeah,
And
of
like,
course.
my
yeah, it's
favorite
not just
part.
like a one person side project. It requires constant maintenance. That's one of the hard parts.
Yeah, it is. And my favorite part of the whole LTB piece, like it's been since I joined LTB, like there are people in different conferences. You're from LTB, like dude, I appreciate, I love your website. We'll use it in the LTB, the pizza and everything. And like, yeah, like I'll just take credit for something I didn't build, but but yeah, we've been talking about this thing like LTB for DAOs or whatever with Christoph, and we're thinking about it. But yeah, as he said and you agreed, it's like it's very difficult to just even come up with the standards that we're going to be measuring or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's hard as shit.
Yeah.
I think
And
like
it's not necessarily
I
like
mean, a part of it,
one
yeah.
approach is not necessarily the right one. Like, for example, there's this big discussion around optimism being, babysat by the foundation or whatever. Like, they're
Yeah.
the ones putting proposals. And then other places like Arbitrum, for example, where the control is in the DAO and the users. And for me
Yeah.
personally, I don't necessarily agree that either or is the right way to go about it.
No, yeah, it's like there's not
Let's figure
even
it
what
out.
is.
It's
I
kind
think
of like
it's
a
like
live experiment.
exactly, and I think it's like, and I think that a version of like this that I would make sense is not even saying like passing value judgment on anything. Like the pie, like there is no green or red slice, right? In this world, I think it's just a matter of exposing, is it done this way or that way, and you make your own decision on sort of what that means for you and a lot of these things, because it's very nuanced, right? It's like I think sometimes what's nice about like some of the L2 stuff is that like, look, do you have our exit window, or do you not have one, right? It's just sort of like I think most people will agree that having an exit window is better than not having one. Um, but like yeah, being sort of more like a like centralized proposer versus like decentralized proposer is like a nuance. Like it's not clear that one is necessarily superior than the other, and it actually is very contextual. But for most people, they don't even know that, right? It's like this.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it ties a lot to what Christoph said about a lot of the things. Like if the governance job is done well in advance, the voting thing is just the
it doesn't
detail.
matter. Yeah,
For me, yeah,
totally.
it's
And
more
that's
about
like
like
measuring the voting is sort of just measuring like the at the last step of the
yeah,
process,
yeah.
right?
But a
But
lot
it's
of
like
people get that wrong.
yeah,
Like a lot of people think that being a delegate is just showing up and vote.
yeah.
And I've had this discussion over the past few months. It's like, oh, I want to be a delegate there. And whatever. But are you prepared for the work that it takes? Like me and Christoph, we are
Yeah.
present in many different DAOs, and the work that we do, like the voting is just one thing that we will sing up and say, hey, like this vote is ending. We should, cast our vote. But in order to do that, like there's been hours put in talking with people, reading up, going back and forth on details and discussing. And that's kind of like, I think a lot of people don't realize that. It's not just showing up, oh, there's this thing for vote, let me just pass it through and cast my vote. It's way more than that.
So I unfortunately have a hard stop at the
Yeah,
hour. So why don't we try to take this home?
Yeah,
absolutely. We actually ended up to the end of our questions, so I would like to thank you very much. It was an amazing discussion, and I think we'll be even cutting some fragments to for example show to our team. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much once again, and we wish you all the best luck, and hopefully we can redo this sometime in the future to see what changed and how how Agora evolved with time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is so much fun, and I love talking to you guys, both on air and off air. So this is always a fun time, and I appreciate you guys for all the things you do for the ecosystem. Sinkus, here enjoy a little bit more. I will do the same thing everybody does at the conference, which is you guys do God's work and bring a level of transparency and just comparability that like I think is sorely needed. So thank you.
appreciate it, sir. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Yitong. And for everyone listening, the one thing that, if you are to take one thing home with you from this episode is that if you have things related to Agora that you want to discuss, do reach out to them. They are very responsive. They are very easy to work with. And you're very helpful to them if you do that. Great. Well, thanks for your time, Yitong. Thank you, Chris. And see you around. Thank you.